Okay. Okay, now it's recording. Everything is fine. I'll share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
So, start my presentation by the Trompenaars 7 cultural dimensions, which is again a cultural comparison, we can call it, but it doesn't really have being implemented. It more shows context between different between cultural differences inside a company, for example, in working conditions. So let me. Yep. So the content of the presentation, basically, I'm gonna tell you about the 7 different cultural dimensions by Trompenaars, being first universalism versus particularism, then individualism versus communitarianism, then specific versus diffuse, neutral versus effective, achievement versus ascription, sequential time versus synchronous time, and then internal versus external direction. First, starting off with the universalism versus particularism. So the question that we can ask ourselves about this one is what matters more in the company, rules or relationships? For example, for companies or cultures in the which are universal, people tend to treat all cases the same. Basically, what that means is that rules are more important than anything else. Your personal relationship with the person comes in second. And countries that have this type of universalism are countries such as Canada, USA, UK, and Australia. Throughout the presentation, I will mention a lot Portugal and the Netherlands due to my company being um, a Portuguese one, although currently I'm doing my internship in their office in the Netherlands. So I would say that I've seen a lot of these differences in my everyday. So I'll tell you about it. Then for the particularism, basically your relationship with people matters more than just the general rules. Uh, Countries that have this would be Latin America, Korea, China, and Russia. And I would also suggest Portugal, due to very often some rules are neglected in order for a relationship to strive. That's what I've noticed. And some universal cultural tips for universalism or and explaining your logic. So basically, just being precise with whatever you do. And then for particularism, investing in your relationship building, respecting people's needs, and of course, if there are some rules that must be obeyed, calling them out firstly, then expecting for them to be followed. Next is individualism versus communitarianism. For the question that you can ask yourself is, do you work as an individual or as a team inside your company? So for individualism, outcomes are the results of personal choices. And such countries with such mindsets would be Canada, USA, UK, Australia, and I would say again the Netherlands, where for the communitarianism, quality of life is better if we help each other. So basically, working in a team and not really looking into your own achievements, but more in the grand scheme of things for the team's purpose. So such countries would be Japan, Africa, China, and Latin American countries. And again, I would compare this to Portugal as well. For universal cultural tips, for individualism is rewarding and issuing praise on a personal performance, encouraging people using their own initiatives, and also aligning individuals' needs with those of the organization. And for universal cultural tips for communitarianism, communitarianistic countries and companies, rewarding the group's performance, praising the individual for their contribution privately, but praising the group publicly, and also including the team in the decision making rather than one person taking the decision. Then for specific versus diffuse, here the question that you can ask yourself is how How separate is your personal and professional life? Basically, what is your work-life balance? For specific countries, a separation of life and work is very important. Basically, outside of work, you don't really, uh, I mean, in your personal life, you don't really involve your work life, which countries with this mindset will be Germany, USA, UK, and the Netherlands, where in diffuse interconnected personal and work life is very common. So basically, working and living doesn't really have a clear line that differentiates them. Countries with such would be China, India, Argentina, and Spain. And I would say that Portugal is one of these because, for example, with my mentor and my colleagues, my mentor is Portuguese, so when he works, he even when he's on vacation, he's reachable. You can always contact him about something. Where with my Dutch colleagues, they very much value their work-life balance. So basically, whenever work is done, you don't really talk about work anymore. On meetings only, that's when you talk about work. And some cultural tips would be for specific countries and companies would be organized agendas for meetings, sticking to your agenda as best as you can, um, and first setting objectives with people, and then you're building your relationship. Where in diffuse countries, that would be the opposite. Building your relationship would be your first starting objective, then setting goals. Um, yeah, expecting more invitations to social events and being more social in your work, and also discussing business and social situations, and the opposite, personal matters in work situations. Then for neutral and affective, do we show our emotions at work? For neutral countries, emotions are not tend to not be shown at work. So basically, Germany, Netherlands, and the UK are perfect examples of that. Where for affective countries and companies, your emotions are very well implemented into your way of working. Basically, Italy, Spain, Latin America are perfect examples. I would agree with that very much. And for universal cultural tips, keep your emotions for neutral first. Keep your emotions. Uh, Basically, keeping everything in check when talking to someone. People are less likely to express their emotions, and also staying on topic is very important. You don't really shift from the agenda. Where for affective countries, you use your emotions when communicating. You have to express yourself. You have to express your passion about work, for example. It would be better than being more neutral. um yes, sharing how you feel strengthens the work placement relationship in general, and learning techniques to diffuse situations, because in a more emotional place you have to kind of uh, make sure that you're not overdoing it. That's very important as well. Then for achievement versus ascription based cultures, do we prove ourselves to get status, or is status given to us? Basically, in achievement oriented countries, status is being earned through knowledge or skill. Such countries will be USA, UK, Germany, Scandinavian countries. And for ascription country and companies, it will be different. It would be that you're given your status based on who you are. So on your social circle, on your looks, even compared to your skills and knowledge. Such countries would be Japan, Italy, France. Also, I would mention Portugal. Universal cultural tips would be for achievement-based countries, issuing praise to individuals in front of their peers, avoiding using titles, and rewarding individual performance. Where for ascription countries, using titles to refer to your peers is better. Um, and also paying extra respect to your superiors is very important, because in ascription-based countries, the hierarchy of a company, for example, is very prominent usually. Then as for sequential versus synchronous time, basically, do things get done at once? many things get done at once, or it's one thing at a time. For a sequential time oriented countries and companies, projects are completed in stages. Basically, everything has its own place when in an enterprise. Such cultures would be the cultures of the USA, UK, and Germany, and also the Netherlands, where a synchronous time, everything happens at once, present, past, and future are interwoven, and several things are done at once. Such countries would be and culture Japan, Italy, and Mexico. And the tips for this would be for sequential time, keeping deadlines and commitments, keeping true to them, trying not to deviate from the schedule and agenda, and showing up on time is always very important. Where for synchronous time countries, allowing people some autonomy with their schedules, being allowing people to arrive late to different meetings, and also calling out specific deadlines that have to be met explicitly. Then lastly, for the seventh comparison, it would be internal direction versus external direction. So do you control your environment, or are you controlled by your environment? Basically, in internal directed countries and the companies, you control your environment, you decide what is done and how it's going to be done. Such countries would be the USA, UK, and Australia. And then for external direction, uh, you work with your environment rather than creating it yourself. Such countries would be China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. For the tips for internal direction countries, is allowing people to set their own agendas and develop their own plans, allowing a degree of constructive criticism always, and setting clear goals and objectives. Where for external companies and cultures, external direction rather, is setting goals, giving feedback to people, and correcting their course of route, allowing people autonomy in their relationship and achievements. So how do you use this model? There isn't really a clear way of using it, but what it gives you is the context of differences in your work placement, for example. So some process that may help is self-evaluating, to self-evaluate that any misunderstanding is at the root cause of cultural differences. Maybe even people from the same culture and same country come from maybe different regions. So that's what maybe makes a difference. It's very important to score people, not the country they're from, against these dimensions. Again, due to the fact that maybe they're from different areas and of the country. And also an important process that you could undertake is to examine those dimensions with the biggest score. So selecting from the tips provided for the dimensions to attempt to resolve the problems. And for you, what I would ask you is to maybe tell me about the culture in your company and in your culture, because all of us were Bulgarians, but we work in companies from abroad. So I would go back to one by one to the slides, and I'll ask you personally what your opinion is. Um, yes, so what do you think? Let me know, whoever wants to start.
Well, for me, I see it was very evident between the specific and diffuse cultures. For example, in my company, it's very diffuse. Like we don't have specific distinction between work and life. And the biggest or the most clear example is my boss, who who can go to Switzerland for skiing or to Italy, to France, whatever, just for a vacation. And he is always reachable and he goes into meetings, he goes into calls. So, yeah, and also the project managers and basically most of the people in our company are flexible and they still have some work during vacations or off times, off hours. Yeah.
I would say that in my company it is the same. My mentor, as I mentioned earlier, he is always reachable wherever he is. He could be back in Portugal, he could be in the Netherlands at a meeting. He's always reachable. Where Dutch, more typical Dutch people, they're not really reachable after work hours usually.
Yeah, I've seen the same.
I agree. I agree.
For me, our CEO is German, so I feel like a lot of these dimensions are more maybe catered a bit more to German culture. But for this specific instance, I would say maybe it's a bit more towards the specific, to be honest, because at least for the interns and for the regular employees, it is like kind of emphasized that your workday starts at 9, ends at 6, and beyond that, it shouldn't really be your responsibility to still be like reachable. So it's a bit more promoted, like a separate work and life balance. But on the other hand, I do spend a lot of times with my colleagues outside of work. So we still try to build these relationships even though we're not at work. So it's a mixture of both. And I would say that it's the same for most of these dimensions actually.
Yeah, that's true. I would say that even the fact that international companies have different cultures inside of them, it kind of makes it a mix of everything. But also, that's where you can actually find out, for example, different people where they're from or the way they act. Maybe it suggests why some misunderstandings are happening in general.
Yeah, I do agree with that because like my team is so international and I feel like sometimes maybe because of that there's some misunderstandings. For example, like I have a colleague who's from Australia and I've noticed that he's like really competitive and he's focused on a lot of individual achievement. So there was this one situation where he was on a new project with one of my Dutch colleagues and there was a bit of too much competition between the two of them, so they had to kind of resolve their misunderstanding because my Dutch colleague didn't really want to compete that much.
Okay, it's interesting. Do you have any other things that popped into your head when looking at these? Maybe something that we mentioned earlier is a sequential versus synchronous time. So basically, that um, in some countries and in some cultures, it's basically more prominent to work at a single project at a time than at a bunch of them at once. But it could be again something that has to do with the industry that you're in. But I think that's it for the presentation, and then we'll move on to the next one. I'll stop sharing my screen. Should I stop the recording or?
No, maybe we can just continue.
But
I
we have
guess
to
it
set
would
it up,
be,
so
it
let's
would
stop.
be too long if he continues with the recording. I mean, he
We'll stop it.